Oi, som. Ei, som, teste som. Oi, som.
with over, I don't know, 5,000 citations. So it's very good to have her here. She's going to present, and you may ask her or may keep your questions to the end. Okay? She's going to present her research and talk about internationalization in between. And afterwards, she may talk a little bit about her experience with internationalization. Okay? So, Professor Alexandra, thank you very much. Welcome here.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you so very much. It's wonderful to be here. So I always enjoy coming to Brazil. Sorry?
Because of the camera, your position should be here, if you may. Yeah, sorry.
I can get there.
Yeah.
Okay. But you can't see. Right? Maybe here.
Yeah. What's that?
Right. So it's my absolute pleasure to be here in Brazil. It's my 5th time I'm in Brazil. So I've been in Brasilia, Maceió twice. It's beautiful weather like here. Recife, and now a big tour. So São Paulo, Joinville, and Maceió. Sorry, Manaus, of course. The most important. So we came here this time with a project actually about something slightly different. But today I'm going to talk mostly about research. But Elaine has told me that some of you haven't heard my previous speech, so I'm going to go really fast. Hopefully you understand through a little bit what we were trying to do in the other project. So can you tell me if you can understand me so far? Is that okay? Okay. All right. So we came here with a project called Messenger, and there's this very long title, which from where we took the acronym: Women in STEM and Cultural Diversity, Empowering Women in Science through Mentoring and Exchanging Experiences, which obviously the acronym is Messenger, clearly. So the idea is that we bring you a little bit about our knowledge about the FINA SWAN process, which is looking at, can we have the next slide, please? Which is looking at how to get more women into STEM in different roles. So this is what we're trying to do. So we have partnered with Isabella here at UFAM, Isabella at the Joinville in Catarina State University, and with Elaine at UFAM. And we also invited some other people, so that's why we went also to Sao Paulo. And we're trying to basically tell a little bit of story about what happened in the UK and how we tried to implement these kind of measures in the UK, the good and the bad. And the stories we were telling yesterday, so I'm not going to tell you again, but if you want, you can look up. We have all sorts of material online on this link, so I can share the link, so it's okay. Right, so this is, maybe it's interesting to look just quickly at this. So this is not just one project, there were 9 projects funded by the British Council. We were happy to be one of them. And all these projects together have come up with this Brazil Equality Framework. So starting with the most important thing up there, we acknowledge that academia cannot reach its full potential unless it can benefit from the talents of all. So that means also minorities, not just women, but different minorities, people of different races, and so on and so forth. And indigenous people, we talked here about Quilomba women and so forth, so we want to bring all of those, well, Brazilian chapter wants to bring all of those in. Okay, so thank you, can we go to the next? And the next, so initiatives at Durham, so just a little bit about Durham, so for those of you that don't know, so Durham is spelled like so, do not pronounce it Durham, because it's not Durham, nothing to do with ham, it's Durham. Okay, and it has been created in 1837, it's the 3rd oldest university in England, after Oxford and Cambridge, because for a long time it was not allowed to have a university, and then finally when Durham was created, It has all sorts of interesting things. It's very traditional. It has colleges, just like Oxford and Cambridge. And the first college is actually a castle. So you can live in a castle as a student. And it has all the normal faculties that you expect. And we are striving towards an inclusive environment. Can we have the next slide, please? Maybe something of interest about Durham itself, the city. It's very cultural, and this is the reason why Harry Potter had stolen some of our sites to film there as well. So these are, you might recognize them, the images, but they're actually all in Durham. So, okay, so thank you very much. This was about Durham, and now we move on to the actual research talk. Sorry about this. Lots of moving around. So what I'm going to talk about here is one of the main areas that I'm working on these days. I work in a few areas about data analytics. My actual background is in neural networks, but in more general AI. And a lot of applications we do are in education. So we're very interested in that. And this is why we came to work in learning analytics. So can we have the next? So first of all, what is learning analytics? How many of you know what learning analytics is? 1, 2, 3, 4-ish. So there's many definitions. The one that I like the best is this one of Eric Duval's, who unfortunately left us. He died of cancer. So it says collecting traces that learners leave behind and using those traces to improve learning. So most people stop at the first part, collecting traces. And if you look at other definitions, here it say a bit about learning, but this one, it's about teaching. So I think the ultimate goal should be always that to improve learning, and that's the important thing. So yes, okay, you collect data about the students, but you're not just doing it out of curiosity, you're doing it to improve something, and that something is learning. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Next, please. So who are the stakeholders? So we talked about learners. I'm afraid you're going to have to sort of click now, slowly, or maybe you can click quickly and I'll just talk through them. So we're talking about higher levels, so that's a whole triangle. Just click. Yeah, higher level governments, policies. Click, just click. Okay. Yeah, too much. But lower down the line, there's universities and institutions. I would have clicked a bit more slowly, but never mind that. And then you have things like classroom levels, so learning groups as well, not just whole classrooms. And then you have the people that are doing the teaching, so teachers, academics, but sometimes also the administrators. These are all stakeholders in the big learning analytic game. And then, of course, the students themselves, but also us as researchers, right? So, because we're interested in the research in learning analytics. So this is taken from Discrellar and Draxler, but it's expanded because I don't think they have put enough of this information. I think this is more complete as it is now. And we call this a meso and macro level. So, you know, the fine grade versus the very high level statements. We can go to the next. Okay, so what is the ultimate goal? To improve learning and to personalize learning. And here is a picture that works actually also for the other project. I don't know, how many of you know this picture already? Have you seen it already? 1, 2, 3, 4. You've seen it at my talk last time. Thank you for coming twice. So, explains to you a little bit why you do want to cater for the minorities and why you do want to. Fairness doesn't mean to do the same thing for everyone. It really doesn't. Okay, and my presentation is gone. Right, can we have the next slide? So, what kind of learning analytics are there? So, we start with descriptive, where we just look at the data, that's statistical analysis, but sometimes also things like clustering, and we describe it. And then there's also to the more clever things that you can do with it. One of the next steps is actually jumping over here at predictive. So we want to predict, for instance, what kind of what kind of output the learners will have, if they will have a high mark or not, or if they will pass or not. That's very classical prediction. This is the what will happen. You're responding to the classical AI question, actually, that has been a long time ago put forward, which is what. The other one is a bit harder to do, which is diagnostic, to answer why. Why has something happened? If you have a rule-based system, it's relatively easy to see why, because you just sort of go back in the rules and can give the whole story. If you have a neural network, the why is really hard, and the diagnostics becomes an interesting research problem. And then this one here, which is the toughest, but also the most interesting, which is prescriptive. We want to prescribe to you what to do. What shall I do next? So in learning systems, this would mean, for instance, if you remember all those stakeholders, there's many stakeholders, but if we take a stakeholder learner, then we can say, what should the learner do next? What should the learner learn next? What would be my recommendation, right? So you probably need to do a bit of prediction first, and then when you know what you think is going to happen, then you may want to change that behavior and do some prescription based on it. Okay, so these are sort of the big types. And now I'm going to give you some examples from our own research and my own research group. I have about 12 PhD students, one postdoc who's actually here in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, next one. All right. Yes. Before I go into my own details, can you just click it so it's easier for you? Right. So we have things like what are the main methodologies that we use? A bit more. We have about 2-3 more. More. So statistics is one of the methodologies that I mentioned. Then we have data mining, machine learning, which is sort of the classical thing which people would think of if you talk about data analytics. They all think machine learning, but it's not just machine learning. There's all these other things. Network analysis, it's a very interesting one, right? So looking at networks like this one and trying to find the meaning out of them. And finally, visualization, which is user-oriented. So learner analytics has a lot to do with the user, with one of those stakeholders. So you would want to present to them graphs, you would want to present to them prescriptions for the next step, you would want to present to them some interpretation of the data. So that's the visualization part of it. Next. And I was saying prescriptive analytics is the hardest, but it also has a lot of methodologies. So these are just the extraction. Sorry about the small print. It's from this book, so you can look it up there. But basically, it has things like machine learning that you expect, but you also have here even evolutionary computation or simulation, which is something also interesting to simulate. So remember the visualization. Visualization doesn't necessarily need to be one snapshot. It can be a process. And if it's a process, then you can simulate the process. Logic-based models and also probabilistic models. And all the methods that appear with them. I'm not going to go and list them all. The idea is that they're a lot. Okay, can we go to the next piece? Okay, so now a few of my projects. So this is one that I have, it's called Janet, and it's in collaboration with Israel. And I don't know how many of you know the series, The Good Place? Have you seen it? Yeah. So there is an AI called Janet there. I don't know if in Portuguese they call her Janet, maybe they call her something else.
Janet.
Yeah. And she knows everything. So anyway, we call the project Janet, obviously.
The good Janet or the bad?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'll let you decide. Okay. So this was built on top of an existing learning environment that they had in Israel, which is called Petal, which started with physics and then expanded to chemistry and biology. And the interesting part for us was also that it was covering pretty much all of Israel, because it was a system that all teachers in Israel were using. And however, they noticed that the teachers they liked to use materials, that was good, but they didn't like to put materials up, you know, to send materials, to give their own materials to the system. So the idea was to answer this, how to enhance teachers' motivation to provide feedback, and also how to make them contribute more, which I have put here. And here is just an example of a snapshot from Petal on the kind of questions that teachers were asked. So we had Armando Todak, who's from Sao Paulo, by the way, and he came a couple of times to work with us in Durham, and now he's my postdoc, but he's staying in Brazil because of various things, including the COVID pandemic. I think the money goes longer this way because we're paying from the UK here. Yeah. But he has done this whole gamification taxonomy with lots of different types of gamification strategies. And so that's why the people here in Israel, they came to us and asked us, well, would that be something that you want to do? So can we see the next? And so I don't know how many of you know what gamification is? Yeah, okay, so use of game elements outside of game context, basically. So our research questions were these ones here. What gamification elements do teachers believe will encourage them to provide feedback? And if we implement these elements, does this actually enhance the teacher's willingness to provide feedback? And there's some paper that you can look up of Elad Jacobson and the rest of us. And so we have here collaboration between Israel, UK, and Brazil. So speaking of internationalization. And it was published in Intelligent Tutoring Systems in 21. We have in the meantime another paper in 22 as well on these matters. Okay, can we go next? So the good thing which we saw was, even when we took into account the COVID effect. So what means the COVID effect? COVID effect is that everybody's now online, and there's more people online anyway. So if you say, oh, I get more people in my system online, or I have more feedback, it's like, okay, yes, but it's COVID, so of course they're online. So we did actually take that into account and compare with other systems and their increase, and divided by that, basically. But even so, after we implemented our gamification, we saw that we had a 4 times increase in the amount of review and 2.5 in the amount of response rate. So that was a very nice, we were very happy with this result, and we're going on to add now more gamification in it. Now, I said we use this whole gamification taxonomy, but actually we don't implement the whole gamification taxonomy, right? So we had a lot of tests before that with the teachers to adapt gamification to what they wanted, basically. And I think that was a very important part of the whole process. Okay, can you go next? This is another research, another example. So I have a lot of students from Saudi. This is one of them, so Laila. She was interested in urgency. So do many of you know what MOOC is? MOOC, so these big online learning systems, right? Where you have thousands and millions sometimes of learners. And you have instructors, and the instructors interact with the students somewhat. So they have given weeks when they have to go online and look at their material, but not all at the same time. They can write comments, and the instructors respond to some of the comments. But we've noticed that there's no adaptation, so you have, like for one piece of material, sometimes you have hundreds of comments. And then the question is, which should the instructor respond to? Is it the last one? Is it the first one? Sometimes they respond to the first one because it's first, and that's it. Or which ones are urgent? Which ones are important to answer? This is one of the papers that we wrote. This is in ITS 22 with intervention prediction in MOOCs. And basically, we were looking at, can we predict the learners who may drop out and identify the need for intervention from their most recent comments. So here we did a subnatural language processing on the, can we look at the next page, thank you, on the text that they would submit. And we use all sorts of different machine learning models, a lot of deep learning models as well. We looked at the ones to differentiate. It was a binary prediction, right? So some which are have no need of intervention versus the ones that need intervention and might drop out. Okay, next slide, please. And here is the result of the best two, so the multi-Siamese and the multiple bird outperformed the others. To some extent, that wasn't so. So to some extent, this wasn't such a big surprise because, of course, deep learning works better if you have a lot of data. If you don't, then it won't. But also, maybe it's useful to point out here that we do show the per class results, so not just the average of scores and things like that, but also we look at precision recall and F1 for each of the classes, because some of the papers, they don't give you that. So, and then, you know, you can cheat like that a little bit, because, for instance, you can build a 90% predictor, which just predicts the majority class, and especially in unbalanced data, like for this, not everything is urgent. The urgent comments are few. So then you could say nothing is urgent and get a prediction, really high prediction. Like this, we can show the exact prediction per class, and you can see what really is happening there. Okay, so that was one research line. Another research line, when I showed you the various types of methodology, one of them I mentioned is simulation. You can do simulation. So instead of predicting, instead of doing a snapshot, you can also simulate. Here we use big data for simulating classroom environments. This is another student of mine, Claude, from Saudi Arabia. So we have lots of people from Saudi Arabia. This is also cross-disciplinary research. So Peter and Chris are from the School of Education in our university, and the School of Education is one of the top ones also in the world. And we do an agent-based classroom environment simulation. So let's see, next slide if we can. So here the research is about disruption. So we simulate a student sitting in a classroom, and we want to see what happens if a student disrupts the others. Because, of course, a student that is disrupting probably is not learning, so that's understandable. But what is the effect on the others around them? Will they also stop learning? So our first research question is, to what extent does the existence of disruptive pupils affect the other pupils near them? And the other one is, okay, so what can we do about it, right? So what can we do about it is, how does teacher control, along with peer characteristics, contribute to the achievement of young pupils in a disruptive classroom? So basically, does the teacher have some control? Can the teacher do something to change this? Yes, please.
Alexandra, regarding the first question, it's not clear to me. Is it a positive or negative impact, the existence of disruptive people? What are you looking for? Do you know beforehand, or it's...
Yes, we know beforehand because we know what data we have, right? So the data is about students that disrupt in a negative way. I mean, I know that some kind of teaching by disruption can lead to better results, but here the data we have from schools is about the negative effects. So can we see the next? I'll show you the simulation and then maybe it's a bit clearer. So the data was obtained from the School of Education. They have this massive amount of data which is called PICS, and they keep collecting it. These are the number of records: 3,315 classes, more than 2,000 schools. Okay, next. So this is basically how our simulation looks like. So I suppose you can start running it if it works whilst I'm talking. So the teacher has a lot of parameters, well, not so many actually, because we try to keep the number of parameters simple. We also try to keep the visualization as simple as possible, because with we've noticed from different research that the simpler the better. So here we have things like inattentiveness and number of groups and all sorts of other parameters that the teacher can set, basically, and then they can run their simulation, and then they can see how the students are. Well, here we have teacher control, because we were talking about teacher control. We have also teaching quality. So these are all parameters which exist in our data to some extent. And we're simulating here. Some of them we added actually, and we simulate how the effect is. So, and we started going to schools to show teachers basically what the effect of their intervention is. And this is a very negative effect. So it's quite a semaphore system, basically. So red is disruptive and not learning, yellow is sort of in between, and green is good. So if we move a little bit farther here, because we can jump a little bit. Can you move a bit down? Yeah, so towards the end, so you can see another simulation where the parameters are a bit better selected with more teacher control. Here is maximum teacher control, and look how beautiful everything becomes green, basically. So we started, well, we had a bit of a stop with this during COVID, but now that restrictions have lifted, we started going to schools with this system, and she already has gone into Saudi Arabia, hence the Saudi Arabian translations here. She went into schools and she's putting out together, she's gathering the data to get some conclusions from their feedback, basically. This kind of structure works for Saudi and English because of a number of students that we expect in a classroom. So in the UK, you can't have more than 30 normally. So it might not work perfectly in others, but okay, that's just a very simple thing to show how we simulate the big data and the prediction. Can we move to the next? Okay, so here are a few conclusions from the simulation project. So we did show that there's significant correlation between teacher and peer characteristics and having an effect on the attainment. I didn't really mention, we have things like start maths and end maths scores and so forth, and we're looking at how these are affected by things like hyperactivity. So, and we showed that if hyperactivity is reduced, then end maths score goes up. Also the neighbor effect and how, because we can set how many students we want to affect, and then by changing the parameter, we can look at, again, the whole simulation and see if the end result is changing. I mean, the beauty of this is that it's simple. The teacher can just set very few parameters and then look at the results. Yes, please.
When you mean disruptive, do you mean a type of person that talks with the other person, or is it just someone that has bad grades?
No, the former. So when somebody is talking or whatever, the grades are the effect, not the condition. I mean, the ones that are disruptive, often they also have their bad grades because they don't pay attention so much, but they also have bad effect around the ones around them who also will have lower grades as a result. Yeah. So this is the kind of correlations we saw, basically. Okay, thank you. This is one example of simulation. Another thing that we've done, which is quite unrelated, but I think it's very, very interesting and important because I think it can be applied to different areas. It's automatically literature review. So we did it for intelligent tutoring systems first, just because this is something we work with a lot. But basically, we were looking at the situation where a researcher is starting in a given area, and the first thing they have to do is write a literature review. And it's very hard because they don't know where to get things from. They don't know which are the important ones. They don't know which are the current questions in the area. They basically would need a lot of help. But yes, okay, you can have the supervisor telling them you should read this, this, and this is what normally happens. But then these days, we have actually so much literature out there that even the supervisor is not able to keep up with everything. So having some kind of automatization additionally to the reading of singular papers, just to give you an idea of where this is going towards, this area. it can be useful. So we started by collecting data from publication collections that are relevant to ITS. We've done this, by the way, also with the medical domain, and there the databases were quite different. And we've done it with customer churn, so that's business basically area. And there again we looked at other collections. But these are the collections that we use for intelligent tutoring systems. And here it shows you what it includes, also preprints and theses, and not just papers. Okay, can we look at the next? And then we did doc to back, and we applied work and so forth, and we extracted topics. And here are the topic terms. Sorry about the bad print, but you can just see that some of them were considered the top topics and some lower level. This part here is manual. So this part here is manual writing and trying to make sense of why these topics were extracted. So there's a bit of processing, manual processing of the different areas. Can we have the next? The other thing that we did, because I talked about networks, right? So we looked at how these different areas influence each other and how they're connected, and which ones are more connected. So I think this kind of information is very, very interesting, right? So for instance, computer-supported collaborative learning is related to pedagogical agents and also to simulation. We were talking about simulation earlier, and even gamification. And MOOCs are connected to learning management systems, for instance, and so forth. Okay, so, and you can see also if they're stronger connected or weaker connected. So these are very strong connections, and these yellow ones are a little bit weaker connections, according to the papers, right? So that we looked at co-occurrence of terms and co-occurrence, so something could be classified in more than one place. Okay, the next, please. Other things that we could look, so this is also shows you a lot about not just networking, but also visualization, different ways of showing it, in this case to a researcher, right? Because we have all those stakeholders, this would be for researchers. So here we looked at methodology. So if you just want to say, okay, what do I need to learn in order to do intelligent tutoring systems? What methodology are people using? So here the methodology is extracted are Bayesian learning, fuzzy logics, neural networks, clustering, ontologies. And for instance, if you look at ontologies, the brown ones, these ones have been predominant early on, but now towards so 2020s, they kind of decrease. They're not as, but what is here really big is neural networks, right? So that's the methodology that's used now. So you have at a glance where this field is going to, what are the main methodologies, what should I be learning? Okay, can we have the next? Looking at more temporal and slightly more fine-grained, here it's not about methodologies, it's about the topics. So for instance, we look at each color represents a different topic. For instance, adaptive hypermedia is the blue. And adaptive hypermedia had a peak here somewhere in 2004, and now it's sort of unfortunately going down. And for instance, MOOCs, which are the brown ones, they almost didn't exist, and they took off over here. So again, immediately you know, as a new researcher in the field, where this field is going to, and you can see the trends, you can see the direction of travel. So I think it's quite useful little tool, and that's why we applied it in different areas. Okay, so other thing we did in collaboration with local people here, you may actually know, you might have heard of them, is the work of Felipe and Eleni and so many, David and yes, and Leandro, yes, exactly, on Codebase, which I wanted to demonstrate to me again. And we were very happy when this happened. That was the top cited article in 2020, so I put that on the slide because it's funny. I mean, Codebase, you're using it here, so I don't have to explain it to you, I suppose. No, not everybody, okay, all right. So it's about teaching computer science, to teach computer science and languages to students in first year, but usually what we call in-service teaching, so for other departments that are just starting in this area and may not be very highly motivated to learn this beautiful thing, which is programming. So then the question is, okay, what do you do about them and how you motivate them and so forth. And the good part about CodeBench is that it collects everything that they do. Every single click, every single typing, even the speed of typing is collected. So, okay, so we can go to the next slide. And here you can see a lot of the features that were extracted for them from there. For instance, copy-paste is an interesting feature, which can show, for instance, if students were plagiarizing, right? It's possible that it's not necessarily just plagiarizing. It's possible they have actually been programming in a different environment, and then in the last minute, when they were happy with the solution, paste it. So it's not 100%, yeah? So, and syntax errors and all sorts of other first exam grades, system access, so everything they do basically is recorded and it can become a feature, and then we can look at how this correlates to things like their scores in the various exams and so forth. Okay, next one, please. And then success. So I said scores in exam, but actually success is measured in all sorts of different ways, and here are a lot of the success measures that we used. So non-attempt rate, ratio, successful without resilience, and so forth. I recommend to read the paper. That's a long paper. It's a lot of fun, and we will get more clicks, so that's all good. So, but things like effect of attempt rate, so how many solved questions versus attempted questions. So what is the percentage? So ideally, this is 1 because every single one they tried, they have solved it. But okay, that's not reality. Okay, next. And we looked at various correlations also of these success measures. So this is correlation of success measures. So for instance, with the final grade, right, these ones are highly correlated with the final grade, but the number of attempts is negatively correlated with the final grade. So if they keep trying, they weren't so good. Actually, that's interesting because in other MOOCs, we got the result where the higher number of attempts meant higher grade, because so I think this is because this is a more closed system which is controlled, and it's actually part of the real curriculum of learning, whereas MOOCs are just people online, and people online in general, they're not part of an actual structured work, but if they keep trying, if they're persistent, then eventually they succeed. Whereas the ones that don't try so much and give up, they just lose it. But within a given system, curriculum, it's a different matter. Okay, so we looked also at things like clustering students based on their final grade, their success rate. We looked at different clusters and their features. So again, there's much more in the paper about all this that are good, the medium, and the not so good students, let's put it like that. Okay, so shall we go next? Yes, this is a very nice one. So this is also, this was based on Armando's contribution. So also Brazilian, but from Sao Paulo. We found in Nature that they were representing doing this kind of association rules, and they're not exactly causal rules, but they're close. So trying to figure out, for instance, what produces the final grade, what are the links and what are the elements that cause a good grade or a bad grade, etc. So we and the bigger those blurbs, the bigger the influence basically of a certain feature is. So that was an interesting way also of visualizing it and interpreting it. So here are some of the comments from the paper, a lot of pedagogical implications. Early feedback was considered to be important in this one, and with this kind of system it can be caught. I did already mention the plagiarism versus careful coding, you know now what I mean by it. And different types of pedagogical intervention, proactive instead of reactive, so not after they've done something, but as early as possible, basically. Okay, so that's one very nice collaboration that we continue in all sorts of ways. Can we go next? Okay. So this is another PhD student of mine, actually two, but Mohammed is the main one. He's from Saudi also. So he was interested more in the business side of things. And we have all this data on MOOCs, so we said, okay, but there is actually a business side in MOOCs, and the business side is about purchasing. Because after they've finished a MOOC, the students can opt to buy a certificate or not. And it's even, can we go to the next slide? It's even a smaller percentage of people that actually buy. So if we look at the ones that complete, which is already a very small percentage, even smaller percentages are the ones that actually buy. So it's even harder to predict that, but he wanted to predict that, so he looked into various ways of doing that. He looked it's obvious that you can't directly one-to-one predict from completion only. This is another additional step. Okay, can we go next? Right, so basically his research questions were, can MOOC data be used to predict course purchase based on time spent on each step and learner characteristic? Actually, we looked at all sorts of features. This is just one of the papers that looks specifically at time and learner characteristics. And then what are the most representative features that contribute towards predicting a learner's purchase in MOOCs? And we go next. And yes, we use a lot of types of learning, machine learning, and mostly they were quite similar actually in prediction capabilities. So that wasn't the main issue. The main issue was which features basically to select in here. Can we go to the next? And one of the things that we saw is that it may actually depend a lot on the course itself. So he wanted to look at more data sources and to be able to generalize the results. He also looked at things like bias, so for learner locations, so depending on where the learners work, he noticed that there's some bias. We also saw some temporality issues, so because we were looking at when the students are submitting various things. And actually we have another paper before this one. This is a big one in the Journal of Artificial Intelligence, but we had some smaller papers before which we looked at other aspects of temporality, and we could show that it's not the early bird catches the worm. We showed that it's the students that are very much in sync with the actual delivery of the course that are the ones that do best. If they're too early or too late, they tend to have less success, basically. Okay, so this is one direction of travel. If we go to the next. So, I mean, all together, I hope that I showed you a little bit of a snippet of various things that we do. We do much more. So, about learning analytics and illustrating the different methods and the different stakeholders. This is sort of a global picture of what, in my mind, how these things work together. I think in the past, we basically worked with a lot of rule-based systems, and we had educators, psychologists, and teachers that would come and define and develop systems or help in the design of a system. Can you have one click? Okay. And then produce these systems, and then we would come back, evaluate them, and come back to them and say, okay, this works, this doesn't work, can we do the next step? And then keep this cycle of creation and design versus evaluation, basically. Now I think we're more here. So this was the top down. Now I think we're at the bottom up side of things. So if we go next, it's where we look at what data the students produce. We don't necessarily have very good adaptive systems like we used to, because here we were designing very, very carefully the adaptive systems. Here we have systems which are not that adaptive, but nevertheless we can look at the data and we can get some information how to make them more adaptive. And we return here and do evaluations, especially like with Codebench, with others less so. And then we go and get more data and improve the systems. Now I think we kind of separated that and we threw away a lot of the educators and psychologists and said, well, they're not that important. But my personal belief is that basically this is where we're heading towards, that, we should at some point put this together, and we're going to, hit the ceiling of what you can do with data, and then we still need to see how this works with educators and psychologists. At the same time, though, this is a very good opportunity to test all the theories with and we have actually another paper in preparation, so I haven't really presented it, but we're preparing to submit it finally, where we're looking at are the for instance motivational theories, can they be validated with the data that we can get from the students? So you can now validate theories with which is an interesting other direction. Okay, can we go next? So a few concluding remarks. So one, I showed you a lot about learning analytics, but a lot of the methodology is like in data analytics. So the question is, where's the difference, right? So to some extent, where does pedagogy have a place? Where do motivational theories that I was just mentioning, where do they enter? We had some behavioral kind of papers, like the one with Elaine and her ex-student. But you know, what about behavioral psychology? Where does that enter into all this? So you know, I'm happy to talk about this. Just to give you a few other directions that we're working on. So I mentioned very quickly things like customer churn prediction. So we don't do just learning analytics. I have another student of mine, she just finished actually. And she was interested in predicting why customers leave telecom companies. And she was working with actual telecom companies in Saudi Arabia, and they wanted to know how to keep their customers, basically. And we're looking at predictors, and we use a lot of Twitter data. We use data from the customers as well, and we have quite a few interesting papers on this one. One of the more recent directions that Elisa actually mentioned is we even started doing things like prediction about church, so online church prediction. So we have a really good department of religious studies and theology in Durham. It's like one of the top in the world. It's really, really top. And they were interested to know what happened during COVID for people. How did they act about going to church or having some kind of church-like experience? And they did also some questionnaire for about 3 months, so at regular intervals, to see for thousands of people across the UK in all sorts of geographical regions, and collected data that way. But we also said, well, we being computer scientists, we said, well, we could also gather your Twitters on this, so if you can tell us what kind of things to look for, we can do that, and then we can map the two and see how, if they overlap the findings and so forth. So we did that, and this is a paper in preparation. I should really get back to it and finish writing it. But the interesting part of it was when I had a bit of a discussion with the guys from theology, and I thought, yes, this is just another data application, just another data analytics. Okay, but then they said, you realize, Alexandra, that the church has not closed its doors since more than 800 years ago. There was famine, there were the Black Plagues, there were wars. It never closed its doors. It only closed it now during COVID. This is a big thing. So, okay, if you put it like that, yes, this is interesting. So anyway, so I hope that you look out for the papers coming out on this one as well. So that's it from me, but I'm really happy to take any more questions and also discuss can we go one step before that? These kind of items here that I put for discussion, happy to discuss, or anything else that is interesting. Thank you very much. Just a question.
Now we know a lot about her research and the many students that she has abroad, international students. We can ask questions about her research and about internationalization, okay? So, but you can keep the mic.
Okay. Yes, I cannot bring you the mic, I'm sorry.
No. I think people can understand me. Oh, no, they don't make English. Okay, so I will tell short story, so really to get the point. I have a person that's very close to me, happens to be my daughter. She is a psychology student. So she was called to help as an internship in an international school in Curitiba, in the south part of the country, to help with one single disruptive student. So he was really a case. So you imagine the situation, she was hired by a psychology professional to help her to help with this student. So two persons in the psychology area was focusing on one single student. But this student was basically damaging the learning process of a whole grade. In case it was, he was 6 years old. So after 3 months of working with this kid, she quit. And she quit when she saw the behavior of the kid with his parent. He was really in a crisis of anger. He was biting her. He was pushing her hair. Really interesting situation. But when his father arrived, it's like she said that it was like he was schizophrenic. He changed completely, and he started to behaving perfectly well. And she said he knew how to behave. So my question to you is, in that model of disruptive student, did you include any parameters of the relationship with the parents, or basically normalized everything, or just didn't consider? How, in other words, how do you think the parent relationship with their kids can influence the behavior of this disruptive student?
I absolutely agree that parents are very important in any kind of teaching and learning environment, really. Also, in the UK, I don't know, maybe it's different in Brazil, but in the UK, if they're very extreme cases, they tend to put them in a different school, in a special school, where they have more persons that know how to deal with them and have a better understanding of what to do. So, I know people that have their children in such special schools, and actually they're very happy with it because they really cater for their children. So we don't tend to normally put them with regular kids because it's bad for both. It's bad for the child that has that behavior, but it's really bad also for the other. So these examples were with what we call normal students, let's say. But so even they can be disruptive, but not necessarily extreme like violence or anything like that.
But parents, you didn't consider.
Yeah. We did not have, unfortunately, the data about the parents. That's the problem. So we had, it's not completely true. So we had things like one of the parameters was state meals. Mm-hmm. So if they were students that could apply and could get meals from free meals, right? So those would be from poorer backgrounds. So then you knew a bit about the socio-economic situation from home, indirectly from that, and that had a lot of effect. So that was highly correlated with poor results, basically. So unfortunately, we saw that. Yeah, and the question is then how to try and change that with different types of intervention, basically.
In this case, okay, this is an extreme case, but I think this might be a case to consider.
Yeah, so these students wouldn't be so extreme. None of them would be so extreme because the extreme ones would go to a different school. But even so, we looked into so the one parameter we had was the free meals. So we had that. So we used that actually. So.
Okay.
Speaking more about the disruptive type of student, I was thinking that I think it's really interesting to understand how a disruptive student affects other students, but I think it's maybe more interesting to know why that student is disruptive in the first place. and when did it become disruptive? Does your work have something related to that, or do you plan to research that in the future?
Well, that's an interesting one. The data we had was unfortunately not as fine-grained. We would have wished to have, but we had only from so the teachers. I don't remember. I think it was every term or something like that. They wrote some filled in some form where they basically evaluated the students, and one of them was about their disruptiveness. So it's not as fine-grained as today started and tomorrow is different. I think it would be interesting to know, but that's, I mean, the problem is how we collect the data. So for instance, the one that we showed with the code bench, that was really nice because everything the students do, more or less, you can tell, but you cannot actually tell what they did in a different environment. You cannot tell if they stay there and spend 5 minutes, what happened? Did they go and take a cup of coffee or went to the toilet? Or are they really so puzzled that they keep reading the same page again and again? And, so you still don't have the whole picture, but you have way more information about that. If it's in an actual real classroom, it's a bit hard because who's going to write all this data, right? It's the teacher supposed to write at every end of the day. This, you can imagine that teachers won't be so happy if you ask them, yeah, we want this data from you, please do so. Like, yeah, I already have huge workload, but when they work with online systems, it's a bit easier to get that kind of information, or even offline systems, as long as you can have some data collection mechanisms. So as people are using more and more of in one way or another technology, I think we'll get more information like that, and we will be able to look at things like that. Because you're right. It could be a student that is actually a very clever student. It's ultra bored because he knows everything there. I know my son sometimes does things like that. I do everything that I ask. Well, you're quiet and you listen to the teacher. Nevertheless, yes, mommy. He's like, okay, fine. But I don't know if he does all the time. He sometimes interrupts the teacher and tells the teacher is wrong. So that has happened as well. So I'm not sure if that's considered disruptive, considering the teacher was wrong in that occasion. But, so I think, yes, with new computer systems and usage more of computers in classroom, it would be more, it would be easier to collect that kind of data, even if we don't burden the teachers too much. Because I don't think asking teachers to do that is the right way. Okay, thanks. Very good question. Yes.
So, the question, sorry, my English isn't the best. I speak a little bit better, but can you understand me?
Yes.
Well, I used it to study in a public school here in Manaus. Was a neighbor's school. Wasn't really, we used, how can I say, we haven't any analytical data of nothing. It was really chaos in the school, really chaos. His name was Escola Municipal Professor Paulo Graça. Was a school that the great majority of the students were really pretty poor. Really, they had a lot of problems in their houses. Many of them had to work and then go to school, and many of them had hungry, go to school hungry. They go to school even for eat because this school give a lunch break food to them. So many of them go there for that, and the professors I saw that many of the professors really wanted the students to learn. For example, I remember one of my professors of the school, Professor Yolene, Professor there are a lot of professors at the school that really want the students to learn. So, but they didn't have any. I'm sorry, it's new to me, all that analysis for education, etc. And in my past school was everything really, how can I say, humanical, really, like the teacher hearing the student stories and interacting every time. And I can't understand how can we measure if a student's learning or not, or if he's disruptive or not, because every person is like a universe. for example, in the same classroom, for example, there are a group talking about politics and another group talking about football game and another group see the class while I speak with the teacher about anything. Was really chaos, wasn't it? Really conventional classes, and I think that the great majority of the schools in Brazil, there are public schools, there are, I'm sorry, really bad schools in the analytical. I'm sorry, my English is horrible. Sorry.
Very good.
Sorry. So, great majority of the Brazilian schools are like that. It's chaos. It's a lot of things happen at the same time. So, I wonder how can this research get, how can I say, popularized? I don't know if this word exists in English. Get popular. Get how can this research spread, thank you. Spread among and this, the great majority of schools, which is, I'm sorry, bad schools, and how can we quantify if a student is learning or if he is disruptive? Because it's really, I'm sorry, it's really complex to me because every person that I met along I changed a lot of schools. I went for 10 different schools along my life. And every school has a different dynamic, every person, every place it's a universal. And it's and I wonder how it's possible to quantify and use that data.
I think I understand. So the question is how to measure learning in different environments and in such a variety of environments. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it's easy. It's not easy. I mean, first of all, your school must have been doing something good because you're here. And also you said that you had some good teachers. So I think it's certainly the data that we had for PIPS, it's thanks to those teachers, right? So the teachers, if they allow a class to be as you mentioned, my guess is that if they're good teachers, they know what's happening and they know who's learning what. Because all the data we have is from teachers, right? So at the end of term, they would write down their observations about the various students. So our data is as good as those teachers. So teachers that were evaluating correctly, then we have good evaluations. I mean, in England also we have a variety of schools, right? So we have schools, we call them, I was mentioning the free meals before, so it's probably similar to what you're talking about, students, okay, maybe not as bad as students coming to school just for the food, but their parents prefer them to have free meals, because, and not everybody has that. So we had data about some of the schools having more higher percentage of free meals than others, right? So that they would be on one part of the spectrum and others maybe less so. And if you take private schools, by the way, private schools in England are called public, it's just very confusing. Basic schools where you have to pay, right, for your, that's another demographic, because there's parents that can afford to pay, and then there's quite a different kind of situation there and so forth. But the data that is gathered here is gathered from the teachers, who the data is gathered from the teachers, so it has a human factor in it. So teachers were good enough to evaluate the students, I suppose, and how you evaluate learning. So I mean, you see the problem we have. So when we gather teachers' data, the teachers tell us, right? So that we trust them because they're the specialists. When we gather data like from MOOCs, like from online systems, it's a bit harder because what you take only the tests, you take attendance. So we start creating. That's why I had the whole page here in our paper with success measures, right? And we just looked at all of them basically and see. I mean, some of them are quite clearly correlated, so we must be doing something right because they all show the same measure, whatever it is. So then we know we're doing it right. But there's not just the one thing. there's a lot of debate in psychology, especially about are tests the only way to measure learning, and so that's quite a lot of discussion about that, and I think the answer is no. But so you need more information basically. But at least in these systems, in some of them, we know more. We know what the students are doing. We know how they're behaving. We know the temporal patterns and so forth. And that gives us much more information than just one test on one day, which maybe they had a bad day and they didn't do so well. Right? So hopefully we get a bit bigger picture. But in the case of teachers, we're getting information from the teachers, so it's a we, it's the people that got the data. I hope that answers your question.
No, I'm sorry. That's I don't know how to quantificate if someone's learning or not. For example, in those schools we had a test called Profª Brazil, which is a test that every public it's private, so I don't know, the Brazilian public schools do for evaluate if the students learning or not, and I don't know how to use that data because there are in Brazilian public schools there isn't so much data analysis, so everything every
so this sounds like a project. This sounds like a project you can look at. So it sounds like a good direction of new research to find what is specific for Brazil and
yes,
where.
all this is new to me. All that you told for me is completely new. I never heard nothing about it before.
Projeto para você, ela falou. Bom projeto de pesquisa para você. Ela falou.
Yes, so maybe that's something for you to do, or to look into what are the best indicators. Because I cannot answer for Brazil for sure, but I think that it's interesting, and it's also interesting we can gather the data and see what image it generates and what predictions and what prescriptions and things.
Just to complement, it's really hard to know if the student is learning. It's really hard. It's an open question. No? I can infer that he's learning because he can do the exercise. I can infer that he's learning because he can do the project. But I cannot say really for sure that he's learning. That his learning is going to last for 10 years, for example. It's an open question, Mateo. It's
But it's good to think of it. It's actually a good thing to learn. So you're asking the right question. You should be thinking of this and how this maps into Brazilian context. And because it's great to come from totally different part of the world with some solutions for there. But obviously they won't necessarily map exactly. So it's good to take it with a grain of salt, as the expression says, and try to see what works and what doesn't for Brazil, basically. Elaine was mentioning how learning looks long-term, basically, short-term learning versus long-term learning. When you do a test, you might learn just before the test, so that tomorrow you will know.
Most person
and then
Brazil.
if you were asked another week later, or maybe a month, or maybe a year, different question, right? So what do you remain with afterwards? That's interesting. But you have, okay, so in this particular examples, we don't look at long term, but in some other projects, we did look at long term learning, and especially if you have people that come back to test them again. For instance, with Take Up Women, we were looking at what they say in different times, and also how their success at different times. And so we look at the long-term impact, not just the short-term impact of our particular project. So I think it's useful, and if you can do that, it's wonderful. So, yeah, good questions. Keep the questions, transform them into projects, is all I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one is, you work with different tools. Here, we work with machine learning, for instance. For instance, we work with machine learning, and we have a very tough challenge, which is how to come up with innovation, because it's a very, very tough area. Yeah, so very comparative, a lot. And sometimes we have our students trying to come up with new ideas, and it's very, very difficult. You work with machine learning, but then more related to an application. Even though it is more related to an application, do also have this kind of difficulty, this kind of challenge.
Are you talking about originality of research?
Yeah, originality of
Okay,
research.
okay, yes, yes. I mean, obviously, that's as researchers, this is the main thing. If you want a paper published, I mean, it's lovely to have an application which works. And it's a nice thing, and I think it's, for me, it's also a really good feeling afterwards. Because I used to research in just pure theoretical computing, and at some point I sort of swapped because I just didn't see what was the direct consequence of what I was doing. But I mean, I haven't really put everything we're doing. We're doing also some research on Bayesian networks, for instance, and we have some more theoretical results as well. Some of it is also new algorithms and so forth. So it depends, it's a variety. But in general, I prefer the applied research just because I can see something happening, if possible. So that's why it's interesting to me. That's my own preference, right? So, but yes, originality, you do have to have some originality if you write it as a research. So at some point, it's hard because things are starting to work well, but they don't necessarily bring you more originality. Although, to be fair, I don't know, you keep having ideas, so I think it's okay. I haven't yet run out of new ideas, so I think that's
I thought about the fact you mentioned, okay, we need to have a very huge amount of data. And we also have, of course, this kind of problem because deep learning is a dominant approach right now. So we have several applications, but we don't have a huge amount of data. We don't have sometimes the infrastructure enough to, even though if you had a very amount of a huge amount of data, sometimes we don't have the infrastructure to process this data. And
well, come and collaborate with us. We have the infrastructure.
Wow.
We have massive networks and things. Lots of clusters, we have supercomputers, we have also. But yeah, I mean, I think that if the specific problems, I mean, the applied problems often come back to quite theoretical answers because to solve the problem, it's not just apply algorithm X. You need to see what's happening, why you change the algorithm. So even if you go, actually it's even better because reality is so complex. So when you deal with reality, when you deal with humans, etc., there's a lot of the complexity increases. It's not actually easier; it's harder. So you can find your originality there in responding to specific problems.
Sure.
So you could also publish things with small data and with classical, because I still consider it machine learning. I don't have people saying that it's not machine. It's still machine learning. Some are with more layers, some are with less. It's still machine learning. And actually, they don't work if you apply deep learning to small data. You, strange enough, get overtrained, obviously. Overtrained. As long as there's something interesting and new there, I think there's always potential of generating novel stuff. And I think us as researchers, we're always curious to find out the next new thing and never stopping. I think that's sort of a generic answer. But I'm very happy to collaborate, so and our team and also people.
The second question is you have students in different countries, and I was wondering if you have a special approach to reach these people.
My PhD students. Well, the special approach is to keep Durham computer science top in the world because they keep coming to us, to be honest. We probably should do a bit more systematic things. I think that there should be some. We had also people from Brazil visiting us, and that was really good, and they were excellent students. I was very happy about the collaboration. So, and it's also a lot of word of mouth. So once one has, so in both in Brazil it worked that way, and in Saudi it worked that way, and I don't know, then if they had a good experience and they did a good PhD, then they keep coming. So at some point I had the brother of a girl that had finished with me before, and he was also very good, and I was very happy to have him as my student. So I don't know. Currently I get more requests than I can possibly cater to. But what I have to check is basically their quality. So I basically look at are they strong enough, etc. And if they are, then yes, I'm happy to work with them.
So most of them are PhD students.
Sorry?
Most of them are PhD
I work only with PhD students for the research. I mean, we sometimes, it's not completely true. So we have things like the late law scholarship for undergraduate students who want to do a little bit of research, and I have had 2 of those. But normally undergrads, they have a project, but we don't consider that research. We just consider, they don't have to generate original knowledge, which is the big thing for the research, right? They just have to show understanding and so forth. So if you have a piece of research, a piece of implementation, let's say, in your research that's necessary, then you can ask them to do that. But it's never a guarantee it's going to be absolutely perfect. So,
Which kind of students are it?
So we have undergraduate students like for 3rd-year project. So the bachelor is 3 years in the UK, it's longer like this, and master MM is 4 years. And then we have also projects for master, and they're just a few months. They're not very long, so they can't do a lot with those. So it's some of them. I mean, we had the occasional one which was spectacular. I did something really good. Normally, not much research comes out of it. It's more you helping them and teaching them about your research area, and they get a bit of an idea, but that's it. End up writing papers. It's not like here. I understand here you have them for a year or something.
2 years.
For 2 years. Okay, that's a long time to do research. We do have MSc by research. It's a possibility to do, but we tend not to take so many because normally if a student is good enough, we probably would just accept them for a PhD. And if they're not good enough, then we think, why should we get them for a master's? Because it's just going to be not as good. So, I've had again about 2 in all my career, so very few, and it was hard. Every time it was, for me, hard work. So, and not so many publications coming out of it, and just more me helping and helping. So it's not ideal. So PhD students, I tend to prefer PhD students. Because we can do a relatively good piece of work. Our PhDs are 3 years, they're not very long, 3-4 years, so that's it. So anything beyond that, below that, it's becoming too short and can't do very much.
Alexandra, could you tell us a little bit about internationalization? I mean, your experience, you've lived in different countries, have different PhD students. I mean, you know a lot of people. Some advice, some experience. Can you tell us?
Oh.
Your life.
Where to
Your
start?
life.
Where to start? Yes, I lived.
You're from Romania?
I'm originally from Romania. I did a little bit of my master's in Denmark. Then I went for a PhD at some point in Japan, and there I worked also as my first academic, second academic position as Joshu, which is like assistant professor. And then I came to the Netherlands, where I lived so I lived 6 years in Japan, 5 years in the Netherlands, and where I was also assistant prof, and then I moved to the UK since 2006, where I was at 2 different universities in the UK. So till 2018 I was at Warwick, which is also top 10 research universities. I mean, one thing that I didn't mention about Durham is that it's Russell Group University, so I've been in the UK only in Russell Group universities. These are like the research-intensive universities, so like Ivy League, if you know Ivy League in the US, the equivalent in the UK is Russell Group. So I've been on in Russell Group University because I'm interested in research. So that's something I kept doing. I enjoy working with people from different places and different areas. I call my PhD students something, and my research group as something like the United Nations, because we have women, we have men, we have now one black student who's actually ultra smart, and white, and all sorts of other colors in between. I suppose we have Chinese, we have people from different religions, we have Muslims, we have Christians, we have people in Israel that we're also working with, so it's everybody together and working together. I think for me it's a very nice environment. I hope it's a nice environment for them as well. I hope that we're doing it for the fun of it, basically. We're doing it because we like what we're doing, and I think that's the best way of doing good research. If you are driven by curiosity and having fun with it, then you can do all sorts of wonderful things. So, I mean, recently in July, as you know, we come to us, we've just hosted two major conferences. So we made the Educational Data Mining Conference and the Artificial Intelligence in Education Conference. And we had an Alan Turing event, and we had our messenger project there. So July was very busy, basically. In short, but I think it went very well. Most of the feedback was very positive, so we had over 200, 300 people coming to Durham from all sorts of places, which was good. I think we can all do more internationalization. I think this is something that we need to do. I think just like we're looking at involving different genders and involving people from minorities, we should also look at international themes and try to bring in people. Because I think, for me, the fact that my group, my small group, is from different countries is actually very, very useful. I wouldn't want them to be only one country. I think then you become very one-sided, basically. Like this, you have a broad cultural understanding, which helps you also with, strangely enough, with your computer science problems, I think. We go to lots of international conferences. All our students have budget for international conferences, and they all go. I mean, PhD students, we're talking PhD. Undergraduate, they can apply for some things, but it's not automatic. And this person is Leila that I mentioned. Yeah. But other than that, normally, it's PhD and postdocs that go to. But they have more money than we have as academics for going to conferences. So I encourage them strongly to write papers and to go and present themselves. So presenting is a good opportunity to going out there, networking, meeting people. So what else? We do a lot of things internationally. We are part of Matariki network. This is one of these networks that one of the research areas, digital humanities, has lots of universities. So basically, we're part of a lot of these networks for internationalization.
So, excuse me, are there specific international networks for internationalization?
Yes, there are lots of networks. I mean, it depends on which your priorities are in terms of research, in terms of some of them are about. So this one is also connecting, for instance, libraries and digital humanities and things like that. So one of the projects, before I came in Brazil, I came actually from the US because we were there. We were doing a project with Rutgers University about people of Asian descent who came in the UK and the US to study at university in the 1800s. So, okay, for us, the computer scientists, we're looking at how to automatically connect all these digital libraries and especially image and text and to extract from both of them relevant information and generate, hopefully, adaptive stories out of it. This is one of the things that we're still putting together a bigger proposal. This is just the initial meetings for it. So yeah, we do a lot of things like that with international projects and various people looking at different, so we applied. So the first grant was actually granted by Rutgers University because we applied also internally. We applied for a Natural Science Foundation in the US as well. We didn't get that one, but we were like the next project, so they told us to apply again, but we'll see what happens if, because I'm not sure if that funding exactly comes again, but if not, we're going to definitely, so one of the things, the next thing we do is the Rutgers people come to us, to Durham, and in October, and we continue discussing and writing the proposal, basically. So we do a lot of activities like that. I mean, this is just a few that I'm directly involved in, but because computer science department, we do a lot with companies, with industry as well, which is also very important and interesting for applications, for funding, for all sorts. We do a lot also locally. We don't just go abroad. So because the northeast, okay, Durham is very rich town, but everything around it, there's a lot of little villages which are old mining villages. So people there are not coming from the most rich families or anything like that. So they also need jobs. So one of the things that we were looking into is how to help them into learning, how to help them in finding jobs, and all sorts of things like that. So we do local stuff as well. Okay, I don't know if that answers your question. Yes?
So these students, these PhD students, do you notice any patterns in how they came up to this point to study in Durham University? So maybe they went to a certain organization that helped them to study abroad, or maybe they had certain connections or knew someone. Do you notice like any patterns, or do you have any tips for students that want to study not only at Durham University, but other universities abroad?
That's a very good question. I mean, one of my roles, besides a few hats, I call them, is also the deputy executive dean for PGR, for the Faculty of Science. So I think this is a very good thing to follow up with everybody in the Faculty of Science to see where our PhD students come from exactly, and which are the steps. We do have, I mean, just to answer part of your question is, we do have, for people that don't speak English, we do have actually pre-sessional English classes. So that's before the study actually starts. They can go and enroll into that. So that exists. We do have some other ways for students locally or internationally. So there are some kind of schools that basically take them through a whole year of study and just to prepare them to enter university. And I forgot now the name of them, sorry. I really should know because I went to their, I was an external exam, I was on the exam board as a representative of the university. It's called a limit tutor. But there they study things like also programming and also some data science and some more specific subjects that are related to what we're teaching, so that when they come, they can hit the ground running, so to speak. I mean, all of these things are unfortunately not free, right? So they would have to pay for them. So it depends. I mean, we have also through China scholarships. So we have a lot of China scholarship students that are sponsored by China, and they want to do with us PhDs. So that's also very, very competitive. So actually, get really good students that way. There were some students from Brazil, sponsored by Brazilian funders. We had from Jordan also people sponsored through that. Saudi I mentioned already that we had a lot. Not so many Turkish, although I have been invited at some point to the Turkish embassy to discuss, because they also have some program, and seemingly their students should be very good. Actually, we should probably get more often. Not sure why they're not coming to us. Maybe they like London more. I don't know. In terms of preparation, I mean, once they come and talk with us, with one of the academics, it depends a little bit on the academic, but what I usually do is I ask all people that send me a message saying, I want to study with you. I say, okay, send me a proposal. I say immediately, I say in that email, I say this is not because this will be a final project. This is just because I want to know if you can write a proposal. So it's like a first test, right? And then they go back and some can do it, some cannot do it. And then if I do help them. So if they say things like I don't really know, or I say okay, fine. Tell me what research area would you like, and look at my research areas that I do, because obviously I wouldn't want to be too far away from what is there. That also makes them read some of my papers, hopefully, and then I can check if they can understand something of it and they make some sense of it. Then I say, okay, you don't have to write a whole proposal yet, but let's think of some research questions. What research questions do you want to answer? And you can send me, and so we feedback a bit. I mean, it depends. Some of them are really not very good at this, and at which point I say, well, maybe you can find some other place. But if they go on with this, eventually they write a whole proposal, right? And then that's a first test. And then if they manage that, then I invite them for an interview. And then at the interview, I ask them more questions about what they're doing. And programming skills these days is useful. Things like their skills in data science are, but also Python and so on, PyTorch. I saw some of my colleagues do something very clever, which I really think I should implement, which is to put some very simple, like math tests and simple programming, with things like, to see how good the students are in general. But we are trying to interview pretty much every student. And once if they go through all of this, and usually it's not just one person interviewed, usually it's with another colleagues, because in Durham we have 2 supervisors for each PhD student. One is the main supervisor, and the other one is additional. And that sort of helps if there's any problems. Or so the division between the 2 supervisors can be different. Can be 50-50, but it can be 90 and 10%. So I usually do the 90 and 10, I must admit, because I like to be my supervisor and my students. So it depends. So that they get this kind of interaction with people that they're working with. Because it's very important in the end, you're going to end up with one person talking most of the time. So you really need to get along with that. I mean, it's all very good that you're a good student, etc. But actually, can you actually work with that person? If you can, no, it's going to be a terrible experience for you. So it's going to be not good. So this kind of initial testing and so forth also answers that question, right? So, but each person has slightly different working style. I mean, I do a lot of streaming, I must admit, but other people do other methods, etc. So it's all WhatsApping, and I every now and then will look at my WhatsApp and go, ooh, there's another 20 messages. So, each to their own, but because the supervisor needs to adjust to you, and you need to adjust to the supervisor, basically. Because I don't use the same method for all my students, and that would be silly, but still, it's a mutual kind of arrangement. So hopefully that answers a little bit of the question.
Sorry. How to become scientists? In Brazil, my father told me that the only way you become a scientist in Brazil is if you make a selection to become a university professor, and in university professor become a researcher. That's my father told me this is the only way to become a scientist in Brazil. And then I speak to many other people that told me, yeah, that's really hard to be a scientist in Brazil. But in the world, how can people like us, like Brazilians, who is getting the high school right now, who is getting in the university right now, and is starting this academical life, you can become researchers, can become scientists?
Yeah, I would recommend that you first get involved in some of the projects at your university to see if you like research. I suppose you have that anyway, right? Because you have a sort of research project at the end of your studies, right?
He already proposed a bunch of them. So
okay, there you go. So go through that, see if you like research, and then if you like research, then you can consider if you continue becoming a researcher. I think it's the same as elsewhere in Brazil. It's, yes, you can become a professor. I don't know how hard it is here, but in the UK it's not so easy. I mean, very small percentage of graduates actually come and join us. Some do, it's not impossible, so it's okay. But you can also be a researcher in a company. So certainly all these big companies like Google, Amazon, etc., they have research institutes. So if you like just research and not, for instance, teaching and also other interesting admin, then maybe joining one of these companies that have research section might be another way for you, you know, and then you do just pure research and nothing else. So there are other options. So it depends if you like. I mean, if you want to make up your mind, you can ask, I don't know, your teachers here if they can give you some teaching opportunity at some point. I'm not sure how that works, but I'm sure at some point, you know, especially if you do some PhD or something, then you could also have some chances of teaching and see if that's something you like, or if you just like research, at which point you can go to research institute.
So maybe I can help in this question for Brazil specifically. Of course, to be a researcher, you have to go to academics. You have to go to the university and go to your doctorate, get your degree. After that, Brazil is being mature enough to give good opportunities in companies and research institutes. You don't need, if you want to be a researcher, scientist, now in Brazil, the only way to do that is not only to go to the university and do a research. You have a lot of options. The point is, for instance, here in Manaus, I know that we have 3 or 4 open positions for PhDs. But they don't fill the position, or they do not give the position to you just because you have a degree. You have to have the competence. You have to have the skills they need. And that is the point here. And you start doing this in this discussion. The education quality in Brazil has decreased a lot in the last 20 to 10 years. And then you got to the point that had to get this moving up again, or you have a problem. The whole development process of the country might be under risk because the graduate, undergraduate students, they are not getting the complete skills. Of course, have good universities, but they don't prepare and modern students for the demand. So get your studies well, do a good PhD, do it well, then you have a lot of opportunities in the market, not only the academic.
So
I just say thank you.
Oh, thank you. So I think we're going to stop streaming and stop this talk, but Alexandra is here, so you can talk a little more with her. We have comments from the internet.
Did we?
Oh, because I don't have my battery anymore. So
It's the second part of the question and answer. The comments from the internet.
Oh, okay.
Okay, one comment is one thanking you and telling that he was amazed by your research. I will forward this message to you. And about internationalization, I think Durham University must be very popular. Many students would like to study in the UK. Here we are in a more isolated region. What advice could you give us to generate more attraction for students from other countries to come and study with us? It's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a beautiful area. So I suppose you could probably play on that. You know, if you remember, I showed you one of the things I showed you is that we are in Harry Potter, that we have such a beautiful buildings and so forth. So you know, play to your strengths because you have them. So use those. And I suppose it's all about also the context that your academics do, which I'm really happy to be here and happy to work with whomever wants to work in these areas, and this way you get more visibility internationally as well, and slowly build those portfolio, I suppose.
Maybe slowly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Marketing.
Right.
It's a bit of both. I mean, social media is good. I mean, we have seen the queen of social media earlier. So yeah, there's lots of ways. It's not just one way, right? I think there's many things, and it depends how serious you are about bringing more people. Because it's work. It's not going to happen overnight. It's work. So, okay, but thank you for the question.
Okay, let's thank Alexandra, please. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you for all the good questions. Thank you.